One cowboy took in a wounded Apache girl. Days later, her tribe swore loyalty to his ranch. Welcome back to our incredible true stories from the American frontier. Before we dive into today's extraordinary tale of courage, honor, and unexpected alliances in the untamed Southwest, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss any of these amazing stories. And please, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love connecting with our viewers around the world. Today's story will show you how one act of compassion in the Arizona territory changed the course of history for an entire community. So grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, and let's travel back to 1884, where one lonely cowboy's decision to help a stranger would forge an unbreakable bond that would echo through generations. Chapter 1. Blood on the Desert Sand. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the red rock landscape as Thomas "Tom" Brennan rode his paint horse along the rim of Devil's Canyon. The 35-year-old Irish immigrant wiped the sweat from his brow with a bandana that had seen better days, his weathered hands steady on the reins, despite the heat that would have felled lesser men. Tom's ranch sat in one of the most isolated and dangerous parts of the territory, a fact that had allowed him to purchase the land cheaply from a man eager to leave Apache country behind. Most folks thought Tom was either crazy or had a death wish, but he'd found something in this harsh, beautiful landscape that spoke to his soul. After years of working other men's cattle for meager wages, he finally had something of his own. His spread wasn't much: a modest adobe house he'd built with his own hands, a small barn, and about 50 head of hardy cattle that could survive in this unforgiving terrain. But it was his, and that meant everything to a man who'd grown up with nothing in the slums of Boston before making his way west after the Civil War. The Apache had been relatively quiet in this area for the past year, though Tom knew better than to let his guard down completely. He'd learned to read the signs. When the birds went silent, when his horses grew nervous for no apparent reason, when the very air seemed to hold its breath. Today felt different, though. There was a tension in the desert that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. As he guided his horse down a narrow trail into the canyon, Tom spotted something that made his blood run cold. Buzzards were circling about a quarter-mile ahead, their dark shapes stark against the brilliant blue sky. In this country, buzzards usually meant only one thing: death. Tom spurred his horse forward, his hand instinctively moving to check the Winchester rifle secured to his saddle. As he drew closer to the source of the bird's interest, he could make out what appeared to be the remains of a small Apache camp. Scattered belongings, overturned cooking pots, and dark stains on the red sand told a story of violence and tragedy. But it was the sound that stopped him cold, a faint whimpering, so quiet he almost missed it over the wind whistling through the canyon walls. Tom dismounted carefully, his rifle ready, and followed the sound to a cluster of large boulders near what had once been the center of the camp. Hidden in the shadow of the rocks, he found her, an Apache girl no more than 10 years old, badly wounded and barely conscious. Her traditional dress was torn and blood-stained, and Tom could see at least 2 serious injuries: a deep gash on her left arm that was still bleeding slowly, and what appeared to be a bullet wound in her shoulder. The girl's dark eyes fluttered open when she heard Tom's approach, and despite her obvious pain and weakness, she tried to shrink further back into the rocks. Tom could see the fear in her eyes, the same look he'd seen in wounded animals, the expectation of death from yet another enemy. "Easy there, little one," Tom said softly, setting his rifle down and showing his empty hands. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl said something in Apache, her voice barely a whisper. Tom didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. She was asking about her family, her people. Tom's heart sank as he looked around at the devastation of the camp. Whatever had happened here, this child was likely the only survivor. Tom had seen enough violence in his life, first in the war, then in various frontier conflicts, to recognize the work of a cavalry patrol or perhaps a group of vigilantes. The Apache camp had been small, probably just a family group, and they'd been caught completely off guard. "Listen, sweetheart," Tom said, still speaking in that same gentle tone. "I know you can't understand me, but I'm going to help you. You're hurt bad, and you need doctoring." The girl tried to pull away when Tom reached for her, but she was too weak to offer much resistance. As gently as possible, Tom lifted her in his arms. She was so light, so fragile, and he could feel her fevered skin through her torn dress. The ride back to his ranch was one of the longest of Tom's life. The girl drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally murmuring words in Apache that Tom wished he could understand. More than once, he thought he was going to lose her, but each time her breathing would steady and her grip on his shirt would tighten slightly. By the time they reached his adobe house, The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. Tom carried the girl inside and laid her carefully on his own bed, the only bed in the small house. Working by lamplight, he began the delicate process of cleaning and treating her wounds. The bullet wound in her shoulder was serious, but clean. The bullet had passed through without hitting bone or major blood vessels. The gash on her arm was deeper and more ragged, requiring careful stitching with thread Tom typically used for mending saddles. His hands, more accustomed to handling rope and cattle than performing surgery, worked with surprising steadiness born of necessity. As he worked, Tom found himself talking to the unconscious girl, partly to calm his own nerves and partly because he hoped his voice might provide some comfort, even if she couldn't understand his words. "Though you're going to be all right, little warrior," he murmured as he bandaged her arm. "I don't know what happened to your family, but I promise you this. Nobody's going to hurt you while you're under my roof. Tom Brennan's word on that." The girl stirred slightly at the sound of his voice, her eyelids fluttering. For just a moment, her dark eyes focused on his face with startling clarity before she drifted back into unconsciousness. As the night wore on, Tom kept vigil beside the bed, changing cool cloths on her fevered brow and checking her wounds for signs of infection. He'd seen enough battlefield injuries to know that the next few days would be critical. If infection set in, there would be little he could do for her in this isolated place. But beyond the immediate medical concerns, Tom found himself grappling with larger questions. What was he going to do if she survived? The Apache and white settlers in this area were in a state of barely controlled warfare. If anyone discovered he was harboring an Apache child, it could mean serious trouble, possibly even a charge of treason or collaboration with the enemy. Yet, as he looked down at the small, vulnerable form in his bed, Tom knew he had no choice. This was a child who needed help, and his Irish Catholic upbringing had instilled in him a deep belief that turning away from someone in need was a sin that would stain a man's soul forever. Whatever the consequences, he would see this through. The little Apache girl would live, if Tom had anything to say about it. Chapter 2. The Healing and the Language of Trust. Dawn brought little relief from the previous night's vigil. The Apache girl's fever had spiked during the early morning hours, and Tom had spent the time applying cool cloths and forcing small sips of water between her cracked lips. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the small window of his adobe house, he was relieved to see that her breathing had become more regular, and the dangerous flush of fever was beginning to fade from her cheeks. Around mid-morning, the girl's eyes opened and stayed open for the first time since Tom had found her. She looked around the unfamiliar room with obvious confusion and fear, her gaze finally settling on Tom, who was sitting in a wooden chair beside the bed. "Good morning," Tom said softly, careful not to make any sudden movements. "How are you feeling?" The girl stared at him for a long moment before attempting to sit up. The movement caused her obvious pain, and she gasped, her hand going instinctively to her wounded shoulder. "Whoa there, easy," Tom said, gently placing a hand on her uninjured arm. "You've been hurt pretty bad. You need to rest." She spoke then, a rapid stream of Apache that Tom couldn't understand, but her tone suggested she was asking questions, probably about where she was and what had happened to her family. Tom's heart ached as he realized he had no way to give her the answers she desperately needed. "I'm sorry, little one," he said, shaking his head. "I don't speak Apache, but you're safe here. My name is Tom." He pointed to himself. "Tom?" The girl studied his face intently, as if trying to gauge his intentions. After a moment, she pointed to herself and said something that sounded like Ayana. Then she repeated it more clearly. "Ayana. Ayana," Tom repeated, and was rewarded with the slightest nod. "That's a beautiful name." Over the next few hours, they began the slow process of building basic communication. Tom showed her around his small house, naming objects in English while she occasionally provided the Apache equivalent. She was clearly intelligent and seemed to pick up new words quickly, though her injuries left her weak and in considerable pain. Tom prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, foods that were easy to digest and wouldn't upset her stomach. He noticed that despite her obvious hunger, Ayana ate carefully and sparingly, watching him the entire time as if expecting some kind of trick or trap. By afternoon, her fever had broken completely, and Tom felt confident that the immediate danger had passed. The bullet wound was healing cleanly, and while the gash on her arm would leave a scar, it showed no signs of infection. Tom changed her bandages with gentle efficiency, noting that she endured the pain without complaint, a testament to the toughness that life in the desert demanded. That evening, as Tom prepared his own simple dinner, Ayana surprised him by attempting to stand. She was shaky and obviously in pain, but her determination was unmistakable. Using the wall for support, She managed to make her way to the table where Tom was eating. "Ayana, help," she said in heavily accented English, the words clearly difficult for her. Tom looked up in surprise. Those were the first English words she'd spoken, and the effort it had taken her to form them was obvious. "You don't need to help," Tom said gently. "You need to rest and get better." But Ayana shook her head stubbornly. She pointed to the cooking area and then to herself, repeating help with growing insistence. Tom realized that for her, accepting help without offering something in return was probably a matter of pride and honor. In Apache culture, as in many Native American tribes, reciprocity was an important value. Even in her weakened condition, she felt the need to contribute somehow. "All right," Tom said, standing and offering her his chair. "You can help by keeping me company while I cook, but you sit down. Doctor's orders." The small smile that crossed Ayana's face was the first genuine expression of happiness Tom had seen from her. As he prepared their evening meal, she watched intently, occasionally asking for the English names of utensils or ingredients. Her pronunciation was careful and deliberate, and Tom found himself impressed by her quick grasp of the language. That night, Tom insisted that Ayana continue to use his bed while he slept on a bedroll on the floor. She protested in a mixture of Apache and broken English, clearly uncomfortable with displacing him from his own bed. But Tom was firm. "A gentleman always gives up his bed for a lady," he explained, though he doubted she understood the concept of chivalry as it was practiced in his Irish upbringing. As the days passed, a routine developed between them. Each morning, Tom would check Ayana's wounds and change her bandages. She grew stronger daily, and by the end of the first week, she was moving around the house with only minimal difficulty. Her English vocabulary expanded rapidly, and soon they were having basic conversations about daily activities and simple needs. Tom learned that Ayana was indeed 10 years old, and that the destroyed camp had been her family's winter shelter. She spoke little about what had happened to her parents and relatives, but the pain in her eyes when the subject came up told Tom everything he needed to know. She was alone in the world now, just as he was. What surprised Tom most was how quickly he grew attached to the girl's presence in his home. For years, he'd lived in solitude, content with his own company and the demands of ranch work. But Ayana brought a liveliness to the place that he hadn't realized he'd been missing. Her curiosity about everything in his house, her determination to help despite her injuries, and her gradual trust in him filled a loneliness he hadn't even known existed. On the 10th day after he'd found her, Tom made a decision that would change both their lives forever. As they sat together eating breakfast, he looked across the table at this brave, intelligent girl who had somehow become so important to him. "Ayana," he said carefully, "I want you to know that you can stay here as long as you want. This is your home now, if you'll have it." She looked at him with those dark, serious eyes for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and placed her small hand over his weathered one. "Tom, good man," she said in her careful English. "Ayana, stay. Help Tom with ranch." Neither of them could have predicted that within days, their peaceful arrangement would be tested in ways they couldn't imagine, as the consequences of Tom's compassion rippled out into the wider world of territorial politics and Apache tribal dynamics. Chapter 3. The Discovery and the Dilemma. 2 weeks after finding Ayana, Tom was repairing a section of fence near the northern edge of his property when he spotted dust clouds on the horizon. In this part of Arizona territory, unexpected visitors usually meant trouble, and Tom's hand instinctively moved to the rifle slung across his saddle horn. As the riders drew closer, Tom could make out the blue uniforms of a cavalry patrol. His stomach tightened as he counted at least 8 soldiers, led by an officer whose bearing suggested authority and determination. Tom had dealt with the military before, and these encounters rarely went well for civilians who lived on the edge of Apache territory. The patrol rode directly toward Tom's ranch house, and he could see Ayana through the window, probably preparing their midday meal as had become her habit. Tom spurred his horse toward the house, hoping to intercept the soldiers before they got too close. He arrived at his front yard just as the cavalry patrol pulled up, their horses snorting and stamping from the hard ride. The officer, a lean man with lieutenant's bars and cold gray eyes, dismounted and approached Tom with military precision. "Mr. Brennan, I presume," the lieutenant said without preamble. "I'm Lieutenant Morrison, 4th Cavalry. We need to have a word with you." Tom dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible and his voice level. "What can I do for you, Lieutenant?" "We're investigating reports of Apache activity in this area. Specifically, We're tracking survivors from a raiding party that was eliminated 2 weeks ago near Devil's Canyon. Morrison's eyes were sharp and assessing. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? Tom felt his mouth go dry, but he kept his expression neutral. I heard there was some kind of conflict out that way. Terrible business. Indeed, Morrison agreed, his gaze shifting to examine Tom's house and outbuildings. The thing is, Mr. Brennan, we have reason to believe that at least one Apache escaped the engagement. A child, most likely. We've been tracking sign that suggests someone helped this survivor. At that moment, the front door of Tom's house opened, and Ayanna stepped onto the porch. She was carrying a water bucket, obviously intending to draw fresh water from the well, but she froze when she saw the soldiers. The reaction from the cavalry patrol was immediate and electric. Several troopers reached for their weapons, and Lieutenant Morrison's hand dropped to his sidearm. Well, Morrison said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. I think we've found our missing Apache. Tom stepped quickly between the soldiers and Ayanna, his heart pounding but his voice steady. Now hold on there, Lieutenant. That's just a little girl. That's an Apache child, Mr. Brennan, Morrison corrected coldly, and you're harboring her illegally. That constitutes aid and comfort to hostile Indians, which is a federal crime. Tom could see Ayanna behind him, pressed against the doorframe, her eyes wide with fear. She understood enough English now to know that she was in danger, and probably understood that Tom was in danger because of her. She's wounded and alone, Tom said firmly. Her family's dead. She's no threat to anybody. That remains to be seen, Morrison replied. Some Apache children grow up to be Apache warriors. It's our policy to relocate all hostiles to the reservation, regardless of age. Tom knew what relocation meant in practice. At best, Ayanna would be sent to one of the government boarding schools where native children were stripped of their culture and identity. At worst, she might simply disappear into the military system and never be seen again. She's under my protection, Tom said quietly, but his voice carried absolute conviction. I won't let you take her. Lieutenant Morrison's eyes narrowed. Mr. Brennan, I'd advise you to reconsider your position. Harboring hostile Indians is treason. I could have you arrested and this entire ranch confiscated. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Tom was acutely aware that he was facing 8 armed soldiers with nothing but his convictions and a single rifle. But as he thought about Ayanna's trust in him, about the way she'd smiled when she called his house her home, he knew he couldn't back down. Then I guess you'll have to arrest me, Tom said simply. Before Morrison could respond, one of his sergeants called out urgently, Lieutenant, riders approaching from the east. Everyone turned to look, and Tom felt his blood chill as he saw what was coming. At least 20 Apache warriors were riding hard toward the ranch, their war paint and weapons clearly visible even at a distance. Jesus Christ, Morrison breathed, his hand tightening on his pistol. How many of them are there? Tom squinted against the desert glare, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The Apache weren't riding in attack formation. Their approach was more formal, more ceremonial. At their head rode a tall warrior whose elaborate headdress and decorated horse marked him as a chief or war leader. Ayanna! The lead Apache called out as they drew closer, his voice carrying clearly across the desert air. Behind Tom, the girl suddenly straightened, her fear replaced by excitement and recognition. She called back in rapid Apache, her voice stronger than Tom had heard it since finding her. Do you know them? Tom asked her quietly. Uncle, Ayanna replied in English, pointing to the lead rider. Chief Manga's brother to father. Tom felt a mix of relief and apprehension. These weren't random hostiles, they were Ayanna's family, come to find their missing relative, but their arrival had just made an already complex situation potentially explosive. The Apache party stopped about 50 yards from the house, close enough to talk, but far enough to avoid seeming immediately threatening. Chief Mangas raised his hand in what appeared to be a peaceful gesture, then called out something in Apache, directed at Ayanna. She responded at length, gesturing toward Tom and the soldiers. Tom caught his own name several times in her rapid speech, and he hoped she was explaining that he had helped her rather than captured her. Lieutenant Morrison had drawn his sidearm and was motioning for his men to take defensive positions. Mr. Brennan, he said tersely, I strongly suggest you get that girl away from those hostiles and let us handle this situation. But before Tom could respond, Chief Mangas spoke again, this time in accented but clear English. White man who saved child of my brother, he called out. I am Mangas, war chief of these people. We come in peace to speak with you. Tom stepped forward, very aware that he was walking into a situation that could explode into violence at any moment. But Ayanna's life hung in the balance, and he was the only one who might be able to prevent bloodshed. I'm Tom Brennan, he called back, And yes, I helped Ayana. She was wounded and alone. Chief Mangas nodded slowly, his dark eyes taking in the scene, the nervous soldiers, Tom's protective stance, and Ayana herself, clearly healthy and unharmed. We have much to discuss, Tom Brennan, the chief said. But first, the soldiers must leave. This is a matter between Apache and the man who showed honor to our child. Morrison stepped forward angrily. Now see here, we're not going anywhere. This is United States territory, and I have jurisdiction here. Chief Mangas's expression didn't change, but Tom noticed that several of the Apache warriors had subtly shifted their positions, and more riders were appearing on the surrounding ridges. Whatever happened next, the cavalry patrol was badly outnumbered. Tom realized that he was standing at the center of a powder keg that could explode into a massacre at any moment. The next few minutes would determine not only Ayana's fate, but possibly the fate of everyone present, and somehow, the solution lay in his hands. Chapter 4. The Test of Honor. The tension in the air was so thick Tom could almost taste it. 20 Apache warriors faced 8 cavalry soldiers across the dusty yard of his ranch, with him and Ayana caught in the middle. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and the situation would explode into violence that would leave most of them dead. Tom looked at Lieutenant Morrison, whose face was flushed with anger, and whose hand was still gripping his pistol. Then he looked at Chief Mangas, sitting calmly on his horse but with the alert stillness of a man ready for anything. Finally, his gaze settled on Ayana, who was watching the standoff with wide, frightened eyes. "Lieutenant," Tom said quietly, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. You're outnumbered at least 3-1, with more Apache appearing on those ridges every minute. If shooting starts, we're all going to die here today." Morrison's jaw worked angrily. "I'm not backing down from a bunch of savages, Brennan. I'm not asking you to back down," Tom replied. "I'm asking you to be smart. Chief Mangas said he wants to talk. Give him that chance. We don't negotiate with hostiles," Morrison snapped. Chief Mangas spoke then, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "Soldier Chief, I know your words before you speak them. You think Apache are animals who understand only force, but you are wrong. We understand honor, we understand debt, and we understand justice." He gestured toward Tom and Ayana. "This white man found my brother's daughter dying in the desert. He could have left her for the buzzards. He could have turned her over to your soldiers for the bounty. Instead, he risked his own life to save hers. Such a man deserves respect, not threats." Morrison looked uncertain for the first time since arriving. "The girl is Apache. She belongs on the reservation with her people." "She belongs," Chief Mangas said firmly, "wherever she chooses to belong. That is the Apache way." Tom felt Ayana's small hand slip into his, and he squeezed it gently. "What do you want, Chief?" he asked. Mangas dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "I want to speak with the man who saved my niece. I want to hear from her own lips how she was treated, and then I want to discuss what honor demands." Lieutenant Morrison stepped forward. "I can't allow—" "Lieutenant," Tom interrupted, his voice sharp with authority he didn't know he possessed. "This is my land. These people came here peacefully to check on a child's welfare. Unless you're planning to arrest me right now, I suggest you let me handle this." Morrison hesitated, clearly caught between his orders and the reality of being vastly outnumbered in hostile territory. After a long moment, he holstered his pistol but kept his hand near it. "5 minutes," he said tersely. "But my men stay alert." Chief Mangas nodded and walked slowly toward Tom and Ayana. Up close, Tom could see that the Apache leader was probably in his 40s, with the weathered face of a man who had spent his life in the desert sun. His dark eyes were intelligent and assessing, but not unkind. "Uncle," Ayana said in Apache, and launched into what sounded like a detailed account of her time with Tom. She spoke rapidly and earnestly, occasionally pointing to her healing wounds or gesturing toward the house. Chief Mangas listened intently, occasionally asking questions that Ayana answered with obvious honesty. Tom caught his own name several times, and he heard words that sounded like descriptions of kindness and care. When Ayana finished, Chief Mangas studied Tom for a long moment. "She says you gave her your own bed while you slept on the floor, that you set her broken bones with gentle hands, that you sang to her when the fever made her cry, that you offered her a home with no thought of reward." Tom felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I just did what anyone should do." "No," Chief Mangas said firmly. "You did what a man of honor does. Many of your people would have left her to die, or turned her over to the soldiers for money. You chose to risk your own safety for a child who could give you nothing in return." The Apache chief paused, then continued in a voice that carried to every person in the yard. "In our tradition, when someone saves the life of one of our children, they become family. They become one of us with all the protection and loyalty that brings. Tom saw Lieutenant Morrison stiffen at these words, recognizing their implication. "Dies Chief Mangas May," Tom said carefully. "I appreciate the honor you're offering, Sir, but I'm not looking for anything in return. I just wanted to help a hurt child." "That is exactly why you deserve our protection," Mangas replied. "A man who asks for nothing but gives everything is a man worth following." He turned to address his warriors in Apache, speaking for several minutes in what sounded like a formal proclamation. When he finished, the warriors raised their weapons in what was clearly a salute of respect. "What did you tell them?" Tom asked. "I told them that Tom Brennan is now under the protection of our band, that his ranch is sacred ground, to be defended as we would defend our own village, that any threat to him becomes a threat to all of us." Lieutenant Morrison stepped forward angrily. "Now hold on just a minute. This man is a United States citizen. He's under the protection of the U.S. Army, not a bunch of renegade Indians." Chief Mangas turned his steady gaze on the officer. "And where was your protection when my niece lay dying in the desert? Where was your honor when your soldiers killed her family? This man showed her the kindness your people denied." "We were following orders," Morrison said defensively. "Curtis, that Apache band was raiding." "That Apache band," Chief Mangas interrupted, his voice suddenly cold as winter wind, "was my brother's family, traveling to winter camp. They carried no weapons of war, threatened no one. Your soldiers attacked them because they were Apache, nothing more." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Tom looked at Morrison and saw something flicker in the lieutenant's eyes, perhaps doubt, perhaps guilt. "Even if that's true," Morrison said, his voice less certain now, "it doesn't change the fact that harboring hostile Indians is against federal law." "Ayanna is not hostile," Tom said firmly. "She's a 10-year-old girl who's been through hell and just wants a safe place to live. If that makes me a criminal, then I guess I'm a criminal." Chief Mangas nodded approvingly. "You see, Soldier Chief, this is a man who understands that some things are more important than your laws. Honor, compassion, the protection of innocence." He turned back to Tom. "I offer you something no white man in this territory has ever been offered. The complete protection and loyalty of my band. Your cattle will never be touched by Apache hands. Your land will be safe from all who would harm you, and any enemy who threatens you will face the wrath of 20 warriors." Tom felt the weight of the moment, understanding that he was being offered something unprecedented in the violent history of the Southwest. But he also understood the implications for Ayanna. "And Ayanna?" he asked. "What about her?" Chief Mangas smiled for the first time since arriving. "She has already chosen. She told me that this is her home now, that you are her new father. If you will accept her as your daughter, she will stay. If not, she comes with us." Tom looked down at Ayanna, who was watching him with hope and trust shining in her dark eyes. In that moment, he realized that somewhere in the past 2 weeks, this brave little girl had become more important to him than his own life. "I'd be honored to have her as my daughter," he said quietly. Chief Mangas nodded solemnly. "Then it is settled. Ayanna Brennan will grow up under the protection of both worlds, the white world that has accepted her, and the Apache world that will never forget her." Lieutenant Morrison looked around at the Apache warriors, then at Tom and Ayanna, clearly recognizing that the situation had moved beyond his control. "This isn't over, Brennan," he said finally. "There will be reports filed, investigations. Let them investigate," Chief Mangas said calmly. "They will find a man who saved a child's life and gave her a home. If your government punishes such actions, then your government has no honor." As the cavalry patrol prepared to leave, Tom felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. He had gained a daughter and the protection of an Apache band, but he had also made himself a target for military suspicion and possible prosecution. Looking down at Ayanna's trusting face, however, he knew he had made the only choice he could live with. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Chapter 5. The Bond That Cannot Be Broken. 3 days after the confrontation with Lieutenant Morrison's patrol, Tom woke to the sound of many horses approaching his ranch. His first instinct was alarm. Had the cavalry returned with reinforcements? But as he peered out his window in the pre-dawn darkness, he realized these riders were moving too quietly, too skillfully to be soldiers. Tom stepped outside, rifle in hand but not raised, as Chief Mangas and his warriors materialized from the desert shadows like ghosts. This time, however, they weren't alone. Women, children, and elders accompanied the war party, along with pack horses laden with supplies. "Good morning, Tom Brennan," Chief Mangas called softly. "We come to fulfill our promise." Ayanna emerged from the house behind Tom, fully dressed despite the early hour. She had apparently heard the horses too, and recognized the sounds of her people's approach. "Uncle," she called in Apache, then switched to English for Tom's benefit. "They bring gifts." Over the next hour, Tom watched in amazement as the Apache band transformed his modest ranch into something resembling a fortress. Warriors took up positions on the surrounding ridges and high points, establishing a defensive perimeter that would make his property virtually impregnable to attack. But it was more than just military protection. The women began setting up a temporary camp near his house, and soon the smell of cooking food filled the morning air. Children played in his yard under the watchful eyes of their mothers, their laughter a sound Tom had never heard on his isolated ranch. Chief Mangas approached Tom with a bundle wrapped in fine buckskin. "These are for you," he said, unfolding the package to reveal a magnificent war shirt decorated with intricate beadwork and a silver medallion bearing the symbol of an eagle. "I can't accept these," Tom protested. "They're too valuable. They belong to my brother, Ayana's father," Mangas explained. "He was a great warrior and a good man. It is fitting that they go to the man who saved his daughter and became her new father." Tom felt the weight of the honor being bestowed upon him. To wear the clothing of a fallen Apache warrior was not just a gift, it was an acceptance into the tribe itself. An elderly Apache woman approached them, carrying a small bag of what appeared to be herbs and roots. She spoke to Chief Mangas in rapid Apache, gesturing toward Ayana. "This is White Dove, our medicine woman," Mangas translated. "She wants to examine Ayana's wounds and ensure they are healing properly." For the next several minutes, White Dove conducted a thorough examination of Ayana's injuries, speaking approvingly as she noted the clean healing and proper bone setting that Tom had accomplished. "She says you have the hands of a healer," Mangas told Tom. "That Ayana could not have received better care from our own medicine people." As the day progressed, Tom found himself drawn into the life of the Apache camp. He watched warriors practice with their weapons, observed women working on traditional crafts, and listened to elders telling stories to fascinated children. Ayana moved easily between both worlds, translating for Tom when needed, and clearly comfortable with both her new English-speaking family and her traditional Apache relatives. But it was that evening that Tom truly understood the magnitude of what had been offered to him. As the sun set behind the mountains, Chief Mangas called for a formal gathering around a large fire that had been built in Tom's yard. "Tonight," Mangas announced in both Apache and English, "we perform the ceremony of adoption. Tom Brennan will become our brother, and his home will become sacred ground to our people." What followed was unlike anything Tom had ever experienced. Warriors chanted and danced, their movements telling the story of his rescue of Ayana and his acceptance into the tribe. Women sang haunting melodies that seemed to connect the earth and sky. Children scattered flower petals and herbs into the fire, creating fragrant smoke that carried their prayers upward. Chief Mangas placed his hands on Tom's shoulders and spoke in Apache for several minutes, his voice carrying the weight of ancient tradition. Then he switched to English, so Tom could understand the significance of what was happening. "By the sacred fire, before the spirits of our ancestors, I name you Toza Nani, strong heart. You are no longer merely a friend to the Apache. You are Apache. Your blood is our blood. Your enemies are our enemies. Your home is our home." Tom felt tears stinging his eyes as the magnitude of the honor overwhelmed him. These people, who had every reason to hate and distrust white men, were welcoming him as family based solely on his compassion for one wounded child. Ayana stepped forward then, carrying a small leather pouch. In careful English, she said, "This is sand from the place where my mother and father are buried. You keep it, so they watch over you too." As Tom accepted the pouch, he realized that he was holding something sacred, a connection not just to Ayana's living family, but to the ancestors who had shaped her spirit and courage. The ceremony continued late into the night, with Tom learning Apache words and phrases, sharing stories of his own life, and beginning to understand the complex honor codes that governed these remarkable people. When the fire finally died down to glowing embers, Chief Mangas made one final announcement. "From this night forward, 3 warriors will always remain near this ranch. They will watch from the hills, invisible to your enemies, but always present. Any threat to Tom Brennan or his daughter will be met with swift justice." As the Apache band prepared to depart the next morning, Tom felt a profound sense of change in his life. He was no longer a lonely Irish immigrant trying to carve out a living in hostile territory. He was part of something larger, a family, a tribe, a community that would stand by him no matter what challenges lay ahead. Chief Mangas clasped Tom's hand one final time. "Remember, Toza Nani, you saved more than one child that day in the desert. You saved the honor of both our peoples. You showed that compassion can bridge any divide." As the Apache riders disappeared into the morning haze, Tom stood with Ayana at his side, watching until the last horse vanished from sight. The ranch felt quiet after the bustle of the previous day, but it no longer felt empty. "Are you happy with your new family?" Tom asked Ayanna. She looked up at him with those serious dark eyes and smiled. "I've always had Apache family. Now I have white father too. Ayanna, very lucky." Tom ruffled her hair affectionately. "I think I'm the lucky one, little warrior." Over the following weeks, Tom discovered just how seriously the Apache took their promises. His cattle, which had always been vulnerable to rustlers and predators, were now completely safe. No one dared to threaten property under Apache protection. Travelers who stopped at his ranch spoke in hushed tones about the mysterious warriors who seemed to watch from every ridge and shadow. More importantly, Ayanna thrived in her new life. Her English improved rapidly, and she proved to have a natural aptitude for ranch work. She could ride like she was born in the saddle, help with the cattle, and even assist with basic veterinary care when animals were injured. But she never forgot her Apache heritage. 3 times a week, warriors would appear silently at the ranch to check on her welfare and to continue her education in traditional ways. She learned to track animals, to read weather signs, to identify medicinal plants, and to move through the desert with the fluid grace of her people. Tom found himself learning alongside her, gradually picking up Apache language and customs. The warriors who guarded his ranch became his teachers and friends, sharing knowledge about survival in the harsh Southwest that no white man had ever possessed. One evening, about a month after the adoption ceremony, Lieutenant Morrison returned to the ranch. This time he came alone, and his manner was notably different, less hostile, more curious. "Mr. Brennan," he said as he dismounted, "I've been thinking about our last encounter." Tom stepped onto his porch, Ayanna beside him. "What can I do for you, Lieutenant?" Morrison looked around at the ranch, noting the obvious improvements and the sense of security that seemed to emanate from the place. "I've been asking questions about that Apache band you're connected to. Turns out Chief Mangas has quite a reputation." "Good or bad?" Tom asked cautiously. "Both," Morrison admitted. "He's a formidable warrior, but he's also known for keeping his word. In the past year, there have been no raids, no attacks on settlers in this area. That's unusual for Apache territory." Tom waited for the officer to continue, sensing there was more to this visit than casual conversation. "The thing is," Morrison said slowly, "I've also been hearing stories about your ranch. Travelers say it's the safest place in the territory. They say you help anyone who needs it, regardless of whether they're white, Mexican, or Indian." "I help people who need help," Tom confirmed. "That's just how I was raised." Morrison nodded thoughtfully. "My superiors are curious about the arrangement you have here. Some want to investigate, maybe cause trouble. But others are starting to see the value in having a peaceful zone in Apache country." "What are you saying, Lieutenant?" "I'm saying that as long as you continue to keep the peace, as long as no raids originate from this area, the Army is willing to leave you alone. Officially, we know nothing about your special status with the Apache." Tom felt a wave of relief. "I appreciate that, Lieutenant. You won't have any trouble from this direction." As Morrison prepared to leave, he paused and looked back at Tom and Ayanna. "For what it's worth, Brennan, I think you did the right thing. That little girl has a chance at a real life now, and this whole territory is more peaceful because of your actions." After the lieutenant rode away, Tom reflected on how much his world had changed since that day he'd found Ayanna bleeding in the desert. He'd gained a daughter, a family, and a purpose he'd never imagined. The lonely Irish immigrant who had come west seeking only solitude and independence had become a bridge between 2 worlds, a symbol of what was possible when people chose compassion over fear. Years later, when Ayanna had grown into a beautiful young woman who could move effortlessly between Apache and white society, when Tom's ranch had become legendary throughout the Southwest as a place of sanctuary and peace, when historians began to study the unique alliance that had prevented countless conflicts in Arizona territory, they would trace it all back to one simple decision. A cowboy had found a wounded child and chosen to help her, asking nothing in return. That single act of kindness had rippled outward like stones thrown into still water, creating waves of understanding and cooperation that would last for generations. The Apache never forgot their promise. Through droughts and conflicts, through the changing political landscape of the American West, through all the challenges that frontier life could throw at them, Tom Brennan's ranch remained under their protection. And in return, Tom and Ayanna became living proof that honor, compassion, and courage could triumph over hatred and prejudice. The story of the cowboy who took in a wounded Apache girl and how her tribe swore loyalty to his ranch became legend in the Southwest, a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change the course of history itself.